What's up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Danielle Hallen, and I am back with another true crime video. And today, we're going to be speaking about the mysterious and unexpected disappearance of 37-year-old Andrea Knabel from Louisville, Kentucky, back in 2019. This case is so heartbreaking. Family dynamics are very complicated. The public has just really torn people apart, and it has taken constant effort from Andrea's dad, Mike, and her sister Erin to keep the focus where it needs to be, finding Andrea. We all have secrets, we all have things that we struggle with, and Andrea potentially had a lot going on that people didn't even know about. So the possibilities of where she is and what happened stretch far and wide. The police department has been pretty tight-lipped about their efforts. I can barely find anything at all in the news articles directly coming from authorities. So most of the information in this case has come from several different sources like family and PIs that have been looking into it. So let's get into the details and hopefully we can help bring Andrea home. Andrea is the oldest of three girls born to Mike and Cheryl Knabel. And growing up, Andrea was raised in a really nice neighborhood in Louisville known as Audubon Park. Her dad describes her as always being happy. She was a very gifted child, and he said that most parents say that about their kids, but she really did catch on to things so quickly. She excelled in all of her milestones faster than most, and in school she did great. And when her two little sisters, Erin and finally Sarah, came into the picture, she earned the nickname of Mother Andrea. One of the best things about Andrea is that she has the biggest heart and just this natural drive to take care of anyone and everyone. So her sisters were like her little babies, and her relationship with at least Erin continued to remain close into their adult years. Andrea was the life of the party. She could walk into any room and the attention was always immediately on her. She was loud and excited, and you couldn't help but be drawn to her. She attended a local Catholic school where her parents ensured that she was set up for a great future, and eventually she went on to graduate from the University of Louisville with a marketing degree. And all of that intelligence and creativity landed her a spot working with Humana. Andrea's life was beautiful and exactly what she had always wanted. She went on to have two little boys, and according to Erin, her house was the fun house of the neighborhood. Andrea loved to be surrounded by people, so her door was always open for neighborhood kids, for her family, pretty much anyone who wanted to come jump on the trampoline and have a bite to eat. So again, just such an open, welcoming personality. And in 2017, her desires to do good were focused in a very specific way. Andrea's friend unfortunately went missing, and she was the very first to jump into action. She went and reported her friend as missing to the police and started searching all on her own. And eventually, this put her in contact with Missing in America. Now, this is a group of women in the Louisville area dedicated to bringing home missing persons. Andrea, authorities, and Missing in America helped to bring her friend home safe and sound, which is awesome. But Andrea, at this point, had found a new passion of hers. She began to volunteer for Missing in America, passing out flyers. She would work closely with PIs. Sometimes she would go undercover. She would speak to families, help advocate for them, and she was really good at it. And you can tell in all of the little snippets of interviews where all the women are working together. And they ended up becoming one of Andrea's tightest circles of friends. Andrea also helped to safely get women in dangerous domestic situations in contact with an attorney that was willing to help. And she did this for no less than 10 local women. And she even took it a step further, attending their hearings to show her continued support. Andrea was really someone that cared about everybody, no matter who they were, no matter what their background was, if they were strangers, if they were best friends. She just wanted the world to be a better place. But everything wasn't always so perfect for Andrea. According to her sister Erin, quote, "She is caring and thoughtful to others to a fault." Unfortunately, this is a common theme that we see with people with this kind of personality. Her big heart and her willingness to help would often put her in precarious situations with not so great people, and she didn't always know when to draw the line or how to really save herself when she ended up getting in too deep. It was almost like the self-sacrifice type of situation with Andrea. She would allow people in her life that would drag her down and potentially put her in danger, all in the name of helping others. And her boyfriend, prior to her disappearance, was one of the people her family wasn't very fond of. But Andrea saw the good in him and continued their relationship, and eventually they ended up getting engaged. But just after they got engaged, he ended up in prison for selling meth. And it seems that from this point on, things began to spiral out of control. Obviously, it was a huge loss having her fiance thrown in prison. I'm sure there were a whole bunch of "I told you so's" happening. And not just that, things in her private life were just chaotic. Andrea ended up being laid off from Humana. There were 2 mass waves of layoffs that happened around this time, and that was a crushing blow for her. Everything that she had worked so hard for in her career had come to a screeching halt. She then began to lean on any odd job she could find, like being a delivery driver for a few different companies, but this too fell apart when her car was part of a hit and run accident. I believe that her car broke down on the side of the highway or something, and she left it to pick it up the next day, but when she went back to get it, someone had just plowed through her car, and it was like off the road in a ditch somewhere. And so it was completely totaled, and with nobody to cover the cost of what they had done to it, Andrea had to figure it out on her own, and the job she had to get her money to cover it required her to have a car. With help from friends and family, a GoFundMe was started to try and raise funds for a new car, because without it, she was jobless. She had 2 kids that were relying on her. She had rent to pay, but the money just never flowed in. So soon after, Andrea also lost her home. So her job, her car, her home, her fiance, all of this had happened in a relatively short time period. And so in the early summer of 2019, she had nowhere to go but back to her childhood home where her mother lived, because I don't believe at this point her mom and dad were still together. But unfortunately, even that just did not at all go to plan. Now, the home Andrea had grown up in was at least 100 years old, and it was in desperate need of renovations. I believe one of the bathrooms, like the bathtub, hadn't worked, or the shower hadn't worked in like 10 plus years. And so Cheryl, her mom, decided to go ahead and get the bathroom and get a few things done to update the place. And this was around the time that Andrea was moving in. And Andrea's youngest sister, Sarah, was engaged to a man named Ethan, who just so happened to run a renovation business. And so Sarah and Ethan temporarily moved from Lexington, Kentucky, which was about an hour away, into Cheryl's home to do renovations themselves. It was just easier for them to temporarily move in there so they could be there to get things done in a timely manner instead of this 2-hour everyday commute that they would have had to do otherwise. And so while this was going on, Cheryl decided to stay at a friend's house instead for comfort purposes while the renovations were going on. And so it was just Sarah, her fiance Ethan, and Andrea inside of the home. And according to friends of Andrea, her relationship with her youngest sister, Sarah, was not the greatest. It was a little bit tumultuous. Andrea often said that she was the black sheep of the family and that her 2 sisters were always the golden children, especially Sarah. There was a lot of competition between the 2, and with Andrea's life in shambles, it was a very tense situation. So it is just a really tough time for Andrea. And aside from everything that was already happening, friends and family of Andrea said that around this time, she started to not act like herself. Andrea would behave erratically. She, for example, would ask to borrow one of their cars for an hour, like just to run a quick errand, but would not come back until hours and hours later with no explanation. She was hanging around an even more questionable crowd. It felt like like Andrea had secrets. Like there was just something going on that she wasn't telling everyone about. And her family tried every way possible to get her back on track. This was apparently causing a lot of issues within the family. They questioned her about drug use, which just infuriated her. They offered to pay for rehab for her, which she seemed to refuse, because Andrea was the kind of person that didn't want help from anyone, no matter how much she may have really needed it. She was way too proud. She liked to move in silence and figure things out on her own and then come back and say, hey, look what I was able to do without your help. She genuinely thought she could drag herself out of whatever may have been going on with her. But eventually it got to the point where they just had to start setting boundaries with Andrea and pushing the hard conversations. So now it was all tough love. And when you're going through a tough time and there's tough love happening, it can make things that much more difficult. But her family was growing more and more uncomfortable with her behavior and the people that she was bringing around. There were safety concerns. It just seems like there was a lot happening that even the family hasn't really come forward and shared with everyone because it's very personal. And it all seemed to come to a head on the night of August 12th, 2019. So that night, their mother Cheryl stopped by at the house to have dinner with everyone, which seemed to be a routine thing. She would come and check on the renovation progress, have dinner with everyone, and then head back off to her friends where she was staying at night. So she brought over Chinese food, but before dinner could even start, Cheryl tried to initiate one of these difficult conversations with Andrea about what was going on in her life. Cheryl essentially told her that her life choices were not good and that she was delaying her progress to a new and better life. It pretty much sounded like she was saying Andrea had gone too long without finding a new job, without finding a place to stay, without a car, that there basically needed to be some sort of movement. Also brought up the possibility of drugs again, from what I've seen, and that she needed to start taking care of herself because I guess her health had also started to slip in ways. She had developed a rash of sorts on her face, and it was just getting worse and worse. It looked very questionable, and so they just didn't even know what to do in this situation anymore to help her. This was difficult enough for Andrea to hear, but things really escalated when Sarah and Ethan chimed in as well. So at this point, Andrea became very upset and ultimately walked away from the conversation and went off by herself. Now, eventually things seemed to settle down a bit, and Ethan offered to take Andrea to a local McDonald's to eat dinner since she had skipped out on it. So around 9 p.m., the two of them headed off with one of Andrea's nephews in tow. And I'm assuming this was one of Aaron's kids because Aaron lived only a mile away. According to what has been said, before the argument had ended earlier, Andrea had agreed to go to therapy, and she had also agreed to see a doctor about her face. So after leaving McDonald's at around 9:40 p.m. that night, Ethan dropped Andrea off at Kentucky One Medical Center to get treatment for whatever was going on with her skin. It was looking pretty infected at this point, so she likely wanted to go ahead and deal with it while she had a ride, while she was already out, not just to heal her skin, but probably also to get people off of her back. So she was released at around 11:22 p.m. and took a lift back to her mom's house because at this point, obviously, she had no ride. So this was something that had been specifically planned. She had been given a Lyft gift card to use to be able to pay for this, but for one reason or another, it didn't work, and Andrea ended up having to pay out of pocket, which just seemed like yet another blow that night because she was short on money. But things would still just get worse. Andrea walked up to the family home, probably ready to call it a night. It had been a really crappy day, and she found that the door was locked. And for reasons that have never been disclosed, she didn't have a key to get in. So she knocked on the door for a while, waiting for someone to let her in, but there never was an answer. So she decided to make that 1-mile walk to her sister Erin's house. Now, Erin had a friend over at the time. They were out on the porch having a glass of wine when Andrea unexpectedly walked up, and the moment they locked eyes, Andrea instantly fell apart. She told Aaron all about the fight that she had earlier with their mom and with Sarah, and explained that she felt everyone had ganged up on her. It was a really overwhelming situation. She even mentioned to Aaron that Sarah had hit her, which just made her more upset. And now nobody was answering the door for her to get inside of the house, so she was hysterical. Aaron tried to console her and tell her that it was all going to blow over and they would all work on it and figure it out. And so she had her friend watch her kids to drive Andrea back to their mom's house because she didn't need to walk through the neighborhood this upset this late at night. Aaron apparently even reached out to their mom to try and arrange someone letting Andrea in the home so she could get some sleep and calm down. But after Aaron and Andrea said their goodbyes, still, nobody opened up the door. So Andrea headed off for a second time to Aaron's house. Andrea explained to Aaron for a second time that she still couldn't get in. And at this point, she was just asking Aaron if she could stay the night there. It was pretty much her only option, and it was so late. Aaron told her no. Aaron just felt like this wasn't a good idea. She had just moved into this house and was really worried that Andrea's noise level and, what was going on was going to end up leading to a complaint. She also had renovations going on in her home as well, and all of her kids were downstairs sleeping, so there wasn't even really a place for Andrea to go. Plus, Aaron had to be up in a few hours to get to work. This is something that Aaron says she regrets to this day, but she never could have known that after this, Andrea would vanish. Aaron watched as Andrea stood outside for just a moment scrolling through her phone, and then eventually she walked off in the direction of their mom's house, and she was never seen again. The following morning, August 13th, 2019, at around 10:30 a.m., Cheryl sent a group message to the family asking if anyone had seen or heard from Andrea. I'm assuming because she figured out no one had ultimately let Andrea into the house that night. But nobody said they had seen her, no one had spoken to her, so Erin started to worry. She began to reach out to all of Andrea's friends, hoping that maybe someone just came to pick her up. Maybe she was just still upset and trying to gather herself before facing her sister and her mom again. But nobody Erin reached out to had seen Andrea either. And her friends that worked alongside her and Missing in America knew right away that something had to be wrong. They too tried to reach out to Andrea, but were getting no response. They were texting her and calling her, and the one way Andrea always answered was through a Facebook call, but there was still nothing, and this was entirely out of character for Andrea, especially with Missing in America. If she knew there was an opportunity to help someone or someone needed her, she didn't miss a call no matter what was going on. She was great about communication, and so when days continued to pass and she was still not reaching out to anyone, the worry continued to grow. Her boys had been with their fathers at the time, and the fact that she hadn't reached out to her boys either really seemed to be what pushed everyone over the edge. She had 50-50 custody with the boys and their fathers, so she had 2 days on and 2 days off, and at this point, she had failed to get them for her time. Andrea is a great mom. She loves her boys more than anything, and she knew from dealing with it on a regular basis what families went through when their loved ones went missing, and so everyone that knew her said there was no way she would do that to anyone that she cared about purposely. She would never leave her boys. So by August 17th, 2019, Erin formally reported Andrea as missing. While police began their own investigation, PI Tracy Leonard started his own investigation as well, because he had worked very closely with Andrea for about 3 or 4 years through Missing in America, and he was concerned, so he offered to help pro bono, which is absolutely awesome. And he was able to thankfully get into Andrea's laptop to try to see if maybe that could help with some sort of timeline, and thankfully it did. Now, Missing in America did something absolutely awesome. They required all of their members to turn on their Google location, and this helped piece together some of Andrea's last movements. And the really awesome thing about Google location, in my opinion, compared to other things, is that it is very specific, okay? It is very easy to understand. There's little timestamps, there's exact locations, so it really helps to create a good picture. So they were able to confirm through all of this information information that Andrea had arrived at McDonald's at around 9:07 p.m. with Ethan and her nephew. They stayed there for about 30 minutes and left at 9:40. She was at the hospital by 9:50, and we know that she left at 11:22. So all of this was confirmed through these Google location timestamps. She then arrived back to her mom's house at 11:34 p.m. And for about 30 minutes, it seems that she had been attempting to get into the house, knocking on the door likely, calling out. Well, we can't say for sure what exactly she was doing. She was there attempting to get inside of the home. And then she made the walk to Aaron's, where her phone confirmed she arrived at around 12:15 a.m. Sometime after she arrived at Aaron's house, she was back at her mom's, and then by 1:38, she had arrived back at Aaron's house for the second time. And this day was very brief because her phone tracked her back to her mom's house by 1:54 a.m. And for the next 2 or so hours, nobody really knows what Andrea was doing. We only know that she was still at her mom's house, and the next time that her phone sent anything to Google locations was at 3:53 a.m., again with the location being at the mom's home. Now, police were able to add to the timeline and confirmed that Andrea had been making a handful of calls from around 1:30 a.m. when she left her sister's house for the second time to 2 a.m. when she arrived back to her mom's house. She had been attempting to ask multiple people to pick her up, to help her find a place to stay, since clearly nobody was going to let her in the house and she was unable to stay at Aaron's. But it seems that nobody agreed to pick her up. At least that's what was reported. I also don't know why there seems to be no activity from that 2 a.m. timestamp to almost 4 a.m. on her phone when it picked up that final time. Maybe she fell asleep outside. I have no idea. The only sort of activity that we know for sure during that time span was that at 2:15 a.m., she had made a Facebook call to one of the members of Missing in America. And this person missed the call but was able to message her back right away and ask her what was going on. But Andrea never opened the message or replied. But that was all that Google locations had to offer. PI Tracy Leonard was able to find through Find My iPhone one last signal from her phone, and this was at 6:31 a.m. I don't know if this is technically a ping or if maybe it just put down the last time her phone was on, or maybe her phone had been turned off and then turned back on at this moment. Either way, 6:31 a.m. was this final thing from her phone, and there's no way to know for sure what the location was because this was never picked up on Google location. So at this point, Andrea could be anywhere. Authorities began to question everyone that they could, starting with Andrea's family. According to what has been said, Ethan and Sarah told police that they had no idea Andrea had even been knocking on the door because they were both fast asleep in the house. Now, I personally don't understand why it was ensured there was a plan for Andrea to get back to the house. I mean, they made sure she knew to get a lift. She was given a Lyft gift card to be able to pay for it. So why was there no plan in place to ensure she could actually get into the house? LMPD at this point managed to get a warrant for the house just to see if it contained any clues, to see if maybe somehow Andrea did find her way in or if there was any sign of a problem. But from what they have stated, they found no evidence of a struggle inside of the home. And beyond that, I'm really unsure if anything came from it because, again, the police have been very tight-lipped about what they have done. Aaron's house was also searched since Andrea had been there several times that night as well, and police also checked into the fathers of her children. Both of them had alibis. They were both able to be fully ruled out as having any involvement. It seemed like all of the typical places they went, they weren't getting any sort of information. So this whole thing was just so bizarre. To top it off, the Audubon Park neighborhood that she vanished from is a tightly run ship. They have their own police force. People apparently go crazy over someone just stepping on their grass. Like, they give out parking citations like candy on Halloween. So authorities hope that maybe someone saw or heard something helpful. Maybe something was reported that night that could help them with the timeline. And so they attempted to go neighbor to neighbor and collect surveillance from nearby homes, but unfortunately, it seemed that no one actually had their surveillance running at the time, and the neighbors didn't seem to offer up anything helpful from those early morning hours, which is just another thing that I find odd about this whole situation. If this whole neighborhood is allegedly on edge all the time, like everyone's ready to complain, like they're all waiting for the moment. I find it weird that no one heard Andrea banging on the front door numerous times that night trying to be let into the house. And it also makes it seem more possible that she might have just left quietly from the neighborhood at some point, either on foot or she was picked up by someone she knew. I mean, according to Erin, she was hysterically upset to the point where Erin was worried neighbors were going to hear and complain. So if she was like that with Erin, I can only assume she was like that at the house as well when she was frustrated and trying to get in. Now, police ended up bringing dogs out. I don't have much information on this either, but I do know that they started searches all around the neighborhood. And part of her family, her sister Erin and her dad Mike, also hit the ground running along with police to try and find her. It doesn't seem like her mom was really upfront and doing interviews, or, I don't have any idea if she was participating in any searches, but I do know that Sarah and Ethan, also some of the last people to see Andrea, didn't join in any search efforts at all. So take that as you will. They were, however, interviewed a second time, and this time they changed their story. Sarah and Ethan told police that they actually had been awake that night and they heard Andrea trying to get in, but they chose not to open the door for her. They explained to police the argument that had occurred earlier that day and said that they didn't open the door because they were worried Andrea was still incredibly upset and they didn't want anything further to occur. I guess, again, this was just part of the tough love treatment that Andrea had been getting from everyone. And within weeks of Andrea's disappearance, once they had finished up all of the renovations, Ethan and Sarah moved back to Lexington and denied to speak with authorities before heading off. They still didn't participate in searches, they still didn't appear to media, they didn't give any statements, they just left. Now, meanwhile, back in Louisville, Andrea's friends and family were fighting hard to find her. Every day, they were out posting flyers around the town. They were searching parks and homeless encampments, trying to find any shred of information at all that may lead to Andrea's whereabouts. Those that worked with her in Missing in America pulled out every single stop to try and focus on a search that they never thought they would ever have to do. Her dad and sister worked closely with the PI, Tracy Leonard, to follow up tips that led them to some very scary places and situations that they've said in hindsight they probably shouldn't have done because it was not the safest thing to do, but everyone was so desperate to find Andrea. She had two sons at home that wanted to know where she was.
A Kentucky woman who volunteered for a group that helped find missing people is now the focus of an intensifying search after she vanished. Andrea Knabel disappeared more than 2 weeks ago. Mark Strassman spoke to her family, and he joins us now from Louisville. Mark, what a strange story. What did the family have to say?
Good morning. This is the residential street where her family believes Andrea Knabel was headed. She never made it. She disappeared, which is why you'll find this poster looking for her all over this area.
Can we talk to you for a minute?
Yeah. Andrea Knabel's family goes door to door searching for hope.
We really appreciate it.
Knabel, a 37-year-old single mother of two, disappeared August 13th. She left her sister's house upset and was last seen talking on her cell phone, walking toward her mother's house about a half-mile away.
My life's not the same right now without her.
Erin Fecker's her sister. Mike Knabel is her father. They told us Andrea had recently lost her job and was going through a rough patch.
It was a total disappearance.
No one's heard anything ever since?
Nothing.
Just randomly it'll hit you or you get really upset.
And I'm hoping that she didn't come out on a busy thoroughfare like this and take a ride with someone to go to someone else's house and never made it. It got into the wrong car.
And that's the worry.
Mm-hmm. That's the worry.
A volunteer group called Missing in America has joined the search.
This is very personal.
Personal to Diane Stump, because Andrea Knabel belongs to their group.
I've looked up the map and it's about 13 miles away from here.
This is Knabel around 5 months ago in Ohio, helping search for someone else who was missing.
It's heartbreaking. We miss her and we're going to find her. We're going to keep looking till we do.
Do you feel in your gut, having done this hundreds of times, there'll be a happy ending?
I pray to God that there'll be a happy ending.
But it's been more than 2 weeks with no sign of her.
Just the more time that passes, the more I worry that this is it. And maybe that was the last time I was going to see her. So I'm very worried.
Some of the information that ended up being collected during this investigation seemed to suggest that she had been involved in some surprising things that most people close to her had no clue was happening. For instance, it was claimed that Andrea had been using meth. Now, according to a few witnesses in the Discovery docuseries Finding Andrea, after her fiance had been imprisoned for meth, Andrea took over his business in a desperate attempt to make some sort of money to support her and her family. If you think about the time that all of this would have occurred, he was thrown in prison. Shortly after this, she was laid off her job. She lost her home. There was a lot going on. So it seems like she tried to do anything, regardless of what it was, to fix the situation. And while her ex-fiance was able to confirm that she had never used meth when he was in the picture, he said that she must have started using it afterward. And this could very easily explain her changes in behavior leading up to her disappearance. But the secrets that Andrea may have had just kept on adding up. She had several Facebook pages, all with different groups of friends, all with seemingly different sides of her, and no one was really sure if that was part of her work with MIA or if maybe it was something else. She had even been referred to as a chameleon in her work with Missing in America. They had bragged in several interviews before her disappearance that she could go undercover in any situation, including with drug dealers, and play that part perfectly. And again, people questioned, was this just a skill that she had worked on to be successful in this group, or was it because she was secretly living it in her real life? Rumors swirled that Andrea had potentially paid for drugs using counterfeit money, and according to the documentary, they found a counterfeit bill in a storage unit of hers along with a printer, but none of this information has ever been confirmed by authorities. But it just adds to this growing list of potential things that could have happened in those early morning hours. Missing in America had even been the subject of a potential documentary, and captured in numerous recordings with Andrea, she spoke on the drug world in Louisville, and the way that she described it, you almost just get this feeling that there's something going on. Like, you can almost see her wheels turning in the back of her head as she's speaking about it. She talks about how drugs were taking over everything, but she also spoke about something else in some of these interviews that introduced yet another frightening possibility, as if there already wasn't just a ton of information being slammed on everyone that made her disappearance that much more terrifying. About a year and a half prior to her disappearance, when she was being interviewed so many times for this documentary that, by the way, it never came to be, she spoke about a particularly dangerous case that she was working on, and she seemed very hesitant to even really talk about it. And this case involved some very scary people, and she said that she had plans to go undercover. And it turned out that Missing in America had ended up pulling out from this case because of how dangerous it was. They felt they were not equipped for this. They could not keep their people safe, so they wanted nothing to do with it. And they started to wonder if Andrea had continued to work on this case on her own or potentially with someone else, because none of them had any idea that Andrea ever spoke of having intentions of undercover work. They had never told her they wanted her to go undercover, so maybe she had been planning something on her own, and this could have put a massive target on her back. This was a really, really scary situation. I don't honestly even want to talk about it based on the way others have. So not only was Andrea potentially in danger from the local drug world, but she also could have dipped her toes into some seriously dangerous circles with this volunteer work as well. But still, police were being very tight-lipped about what information they were receiving, what they were confirming, what avenues they were exploring. So her friends and family were running in circles to take all of this in, which was a lot, and also trying to narrow down what this may mean for her disappearance. It doesn't seem police were really giving them any sort of hints at all of, oh, this we don't believe is possible, or we think this avenue is the most likely. It was just all of this information out there and having to wade through it. Tips were flooding in, and there were endless potential sightings of Andrea, not just in Louisville, but in Indiana and a handful of other locations. So she was out in the news absolutely everywhere. This was great, but was leading to so much more information. And to help create a space to update people, to raise awareness, to kind of help gather these different tips, Aaron created a Facebook page for Andrea. And unfortunately, this just ended up leading to utter chaos, which thankfully seems to have been resolved for the most part. Her family ended up being accused of all sorts of things. Aaron and Mike were dragged through the mud. I'm sure other family members were as well. People were nasty, and they were offering up theories that were not even slightly based in reality, and it wasn't just harmful to Andrea's family, but also to her case. And it feels like all of the attention was drawn away from where it needed to be, and instead it went right to the drama, which is how majority of these Facebook pages go nowadays. From my own personal experience with them, I have said this time and time again, the Facebook pages unfortunately are where I tend to go last, because it is almost impossible to sift through the amount of misinformation and theories and things that just are not really based in fact. And that's really frustrating because families really rely on these pages. Unfortunately, it just seems that people love to state their random theories backed with no evidence as fact, and it starts the equivalent of mass hysteria. And people from that point just take things way too far. And it seems that that is what happened with this Facebook page. Not only were there attacks going towards Andrea's family, people judging them for all the decisions that they made as if they could form any sort of full opinion based on little snippets of their life, but Missing in America also fell victim to the exact same kinds of attacks. People started to really go out on a limb and suggested that Missing in America purposely made Andrea go missing just to be able to find her to look more reputable. They had a really high success rate at the time, and I guess people were like, there's no way they actually found all these people. There's no way they actually did all these things. And to make even more of like a media storm for themselves, they had her hide somewhere. Because there were so many tips coming in and so many sightings, it was like really, really high compared to other missing persons cases. People also started accusing Missing in America of calling all these tips in themselves, calling all these sightings in themselves to again just inflate the case more. And ultimately, this just led to a lot of turmoil within everyone. Andrea's family, Missing in America, all the people that were actively on the ground trying to help look for her. It was like people were coming in and stirring the already difficult and chaotic pot, and it turned really bad. Feelings were hurt, and ultimately the Missing in America group dissolved, which is devastating. They had helped so many people. I hate seeing things like this happen. Andrea, no matter what she was involved in, no matter what her history was, no matter what period, had done the absolute most to find others, complete strangers, and she deserves the same back. And instead, it just felt like people wanted to pick everything else apart. So the Facebook page was shut down, and I do know that eventually they did start up another one. But you guys, awareness is so important, and keeping your head screwed on your shoulders right and being responsible and respectful with things that you add to Facebook pages like that is absolutely critical. The investigation trucked on regardless of what was happening online. And on November 27th, 2019, something kind of strange happened. Mike was at Aaron's house and they noticed that a 2004 or a 2005 gold Chevy Impala with very tinted windows was slowly passing by the house. And it kept doing this at least half a dozen times. And they were able to see that there was what appeared to be a thin white male driving the car and a thin white female in the passenger seat. And so eventually they're like, this is so obvious that this car is driving by this house to look in this house and see what we're doing. So Mike ran out to try and get their license plate. And the second he came out of the door, this car sped off. But thankfully, not fast enough for Mike to miss the tag number. So he remembered it, jotted it down, and immediately reported this to LMPD. Because with all of the possibilities here that had opened up of what Andrea may have been involved in, this was a little frightening, and Erin had her own kids. Like, this was a very scary situation. But the car ended up coming back as stolen, which really didn't help ease anyone's minds. Authorities did put out a plea to the public. This was one of the few times that I saw them publicly speak on anything because they needed help identifying who may be driving this vehicle. But I only saw like 1 or 2 articles initially, and I have absolutely no clue if they ever got any answers to that. Time continued continued to pass, and there was still no sign of Andrea. During all of this, several sets of remains were found, and her family had to sit and wait for identification to see if their whole world was about to stop. I feel like with this case in particular, the amount of remains found that could have potentially been her was so much higher than any other case that I have ever looked into. And having to sit through that and take that time waiting and being anxious and unsure of the future and nervous. And I'm sure it's a very conflicting feeling of, if this is her, at least we'll know. And if it's not her, like, thank goodness, but also where is she? That is something that no one should have to go through even once. And they did that numerous times. And each time it ended up not being Andrea. The sightings continued as well, leading Mike to strange houses in the middle of the night or seedy motels or questionable neighborhoods. He said to some it may have felt like an obvious joke when these tips came in, or a red herring, like things that he should have ruled out immediately because it was just too ridiculous. But he said that this is his daughter. He would not be able to sleep at night knowing that he even skipped out on a single chance at finding her. Every single tip was worth looking into to him. At this point, not only was PI Tracy Leonard working on the case, but also retired homicide detective Joe Fanciulli. He had started dating the founder of Missing in America, Nancy, and he offered to take on the case pro bono for the family to hopefully help them find some sort of information. And Joe ended up going to Audubon Park and began speaking to neighbors, hoping that maybe they would have information, and they ended up telling him a lot more in detail than what they had ever told the police. Several neighbors reported that there was constant fighting over at the house. And while initially they believed that it was just Sarah and Ethan constantly fighting with each other, they eventually figured out that it was actually all of them. It was Sarah, Ethan, and Andrea in these arguments. For some reason, they never called the police over these arguments, and also decided to not tell police about them when they came knocking on doors, which also is just another super strange thing to me based on the description of how this neighborhood was. I feel like if they complained about small things like neighbors stepping on their grass, they would definitely complain about neighbors screaming and them not being able to enjoy their back porch without hearing it. And according to Sarah from Voices for Justice, apparently there was this monthly newsletter where the police in the Audubon Park would report on different crimes and things that had happened, and they had completely failed to even mention Andrea going missing at all. You would think that would be one of the main things they would end up talking about, but they didn't say anything, which is so freaking weird to me. There was also a report from a neighbor that after Andrea's disappearance, the construction at the home, at Cheryl's home, started to randomly occur in the middle of the night. Now, these tips have all been turned into police, but they have not confirmed or denied anything publicly. So this could all be a load of crap, just people wanting to talk and have something to talk about, or it could be something interesting that maybe police know about and are trying to connect dots with, and they've just not said anything yet. Now, Joe also ended up questioning a woman that personally spoke to Ethan and Sarah and went into the home only a week after Andrea disappeared. And this woman is from Missing in America, and I do want to state that she is claimed to be the clairvoyant of the group. And I am all for believing what you want to believe, but I do worry in situations like this that oftentimes things can be exaggerated in order to support what they're trying to do. So again, take this as you will. So this woman, her name is Diane, claimed that she went to check out the house, and Sarah ended up inviting her in to show her Andrea's room. And she claimed that when she was walking up the stairs and approaching Andrea's room, she felt this strong pain in the back of her head, by her neck. She said that it led her to believe that Andrea had been hit in the back of the head or something. Again, if you believe it, if you don't, whatever. But she went on to Andrea's room and said that she immediately noticed a hole in the drywall. And because she had felt those things in her head when she walked up, believed that maybe there had been some sort of struggle in the home and Andrea's head went through the drywall and caused that hole. Now, while she has claimed this, police have also said that there were no signs of a struggle found in the house. However, there was construction going on, so maybe construction caused the hole and there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for it being there, or maybe the hole was assumed to be due to construction and wasn't looked into further. It really could go either way, but again, since police aren't really confirming or denying or saying these are verifiable witnesses, we have no way to know. Diane said that she then went to speak to Ethan and asked if Andrea had been acting strange lately, and she claims that Ethan told her what many other people have said, that Andrea had been acting erratic. And he kind of went more into depth about the argument that she had with Sarah and their mom. Then he admitted something interesting. He said that Andrea's mom had told him and Sarah to change the locks that day to keep Andrea out. So maybe that's why she didn't have a key to get in. Maybe this was also part of the whole tough love thing, but I cannot confirm literally any of this. Joe was also able to speak more in depth with friends that claimed to know personally about Andrea's potential meth use and potential involvement in dealing meth that may play a part in her disappearance. And alarmingly, this person said that her supplier drove a gold Chevy Impala with tinted windows, the exact same kind of car that was circling Aaron's house months after Andrea disappeared. Interesting thing to me about this is that this occurred months after Andrea went missing. So I feel like this guy was potentially trying to look for Andrea to figure out where she went, why he wasn't maybe able to reach her, trying to maybe get his money back another way. And that to me just kind of makes it less likely that her disappearance had anything to do with the fact that she potentially gave someone counterfeit money or owed somebody money. Because if he had gotten his revenge or got his money or had anything to do with her disappearance, I don't understand why he would be circling around Aaron's home, unless maybe they were getting a little too close at the time to something to do with Andrea's disappearance. But he also had some interesting things to say about Andrea and her relationship with her sister and what happened the night of the argument, and also what living in that house had been like for the last couple of months. His friend claimed that Andrea confirmed to him that Sarah had in fact hit her that night of the argument. So that is the second time this has been stated, which again kind of gives it a little more credibility. He also said that he had been told by Andrea over the course of that summer that the locks had been changed on her several times in an attempt to keep her out. So again, potentially confirming what Ethan told Diane. But still, so much of this was constantly changing. So much of it was third-party information and authorities were not speaking on it. So again, it's just kind of up in the air. Now, at this point, Mike was finally able to have a really good sit down with LMPD, and this occurred in May of 2021. And up to this point, every time anyone spoke to Mike, he said that authorities really hadn't been sharing much with him. They didn't initiate any calls to him at all. When he would call, they wouldn't really call back. It was a little bit of a complicated relationship, and he wasn't always pleased with what they were doing. And honestly, it seemed he wasn't even sure they were doing much. So this sit down was a very, very needed and ended up being very shocking. So Mike showed up with a whole list of potential suspects and ideas of what may have happened and what they could do next, because this entire time he had been working on his own or with Aaron to try to figure out where Andrea was and what happened. And so he was like chomping at the bit, ready to talk to authorities. But they shut him down right away. And instead, they informed Mike that they, at this point in time, were totally focused on Ethan. Now, the only reasoning that they gave Mike were the inconsistencies in stories. The fact that initially Ethan and Sarah had said that they were sleeping and didn't hear Andrea knocking. And then later on, when they were pushed, they eventually said that they did hear her but didn't let her in. Authorities also said they were concerned because there was a complete lack of interest in Andrea's case. They hadn't called the police a single time to inquire about the investigation, and they also hadn't helped in a single search, which was sending off red flags to authorities. Probably the most interesting piece of information that they were basing this on was apparently Ethan and Sarah's electronics had been looked into, and there was something odd going on with them. Now, police have not said this specifically. Mike has not said this specifically. Joe Fanchuli, that retired homicide detective, stated in the documentary that he was aware that Ethan and Sarah's phones had been completely wiped clean the day that Andrea went missing. Again, I have no way to formally confirm that, but I feel like that to me is a more solid reason that authorities would say they're focusing on Ethan than all of the other things that could be related to other things entirely. The police also told Mike that they had made a surprise visit to Ethan and Sarah in Lexington, and they showed him the body cam footage from it. And according to Mike, he said that they described the events as they had the last time they spoke with police, and at some point Ethan's temper came through, but that was it. Either Ethan or Sarah have ever been named as persons of interest or suspects. It has been crickets other than this conversation. The police have since gone back to revisit everyone in the family. They've requested people. According to Aaron, they also suggested everyone take polygraphs, but I'm unsure if that ever happened. So it just sounds like they really wanted to start from the beginning to make sure that they hadn't missed something. And sometime in 2020, I do know that a new lead detective was put on the case, so maybe this was part of a refreshed investigation, or maybe they had reason to want to go back. Numerous vigils have been held for Andrea, and Aaron and Mike hold a walk every single year on the anniversary of her disappearance to remember her and help raise awareness. The theme in 2020 was Lights Will Guide You Home, and Aaron and Mike held torches along their walk, and they encouraged neighbors to turn their porch lights on and drivers to follow along with their hazards. And also in 2020, the Discovery docuseries was aired about the case. And I do want to briefly touch on this docuseries because that's actually where I started with this case. That's where I went in with a fresh, clean slate to just get the gist of what's going on. And I honestly really wish that I hadn't, because I feel like it painted a very specific picture that was honestly very convincing, and it focused so much on things that in the end ended up being totally irrelevant, and I feel like it helped sway my opinion. It just feels like the series clung to the very easily sensationalized details that made it seem even more convoluted and interesting instead of focusing on what really could lead to Andrea. And her family did an interview in 2022 where they addressed how they felt about the series, and they expressed their disappointment. And that interview is linked down below. They said that their sentences had been chopped and spliced together and taken out of context. They said that there were lots of things that were embellished for the sake of entertainment. And again, it just took the focus away from Andrea. And I completely understand where they're coming from, because a lot of the things that they said were embellished are some of the things that were presented in the documentary that really swayed my opinion and had me like scratching my head and thinking a certain way about certain people. So it was really kind of like sobering to sit down and hear the reality of what actually was behind those embellished things. So if you're going to watch the docuseries, I highly recommend also watching that interview. All in all, it just made me feel really sad, because I feel like so many times in Andrea's case, personal agendas and egos have taken center stage. Now, when her family was asked in this interview what they wish would have been said and what their thoughts were at this time in 2022, they said that they strongly felt human trafficking could be a huge possibility in Andrea's case. They said that it was running rampant in the area. She potentially could have had connections to a lot of people that may have been involved in that sort of thing. And so they wish that it would have been focused on a little bit more. That same year of 2022, Andrea's family also worked alongside Q, which stands for Community United Efforts, and they were able to bring out 12 of their cadaver dogs and plotted a very organized search to help rule out some of the areas that were keeping her family up at night. And despite the continued silence from LMPD, Aaron and Mike are still searching to this day, and the case is still active.
Taped up across downtown Louisville, familiar flyers with the face of Andrea Knabel, a missing mother of two, last seen more than 2 years ago.
Raising awareness for Andrea to help bring her back is one of the few things that makes this somewhat okay. You know, just to have a birthday without her, because I'm used to always celebrating it with her.
Knabel is 40 years old today. Her younger sister, Erin, 37.
Happy birthday to you.
But the family wants to remind everyone that the search continues and they need your help.
The way I look at it is that there's no proof that she's no longer with us. So my hope is to still find her in any way, shape, or form alive.
As close as we are getting to the family now after 2 years, we want to bring some kind of closure.
Ted Leonard is a private investigator and has been helping the family since Knabel went missing. He says some recent tips are very strong and could help significantly, but couldn't get into much detail.
We're not going to give up. We're going to find her.
A clear sign of their continued faith. The family also attended Mass at the Cathedral of Assumption. Erin says though she's been let down over these past 2 years, she tries to remember Andrea's personality and how she always got her through tough times.
She's the type of person where I could be having the worst day, where you just feel like giving up, and she would just say a silly nickname to me or one of my kids and, just make everything okay.
Erin has gone on in her sister's footsteps to become an advocate. She has to my absolute satisfaction, commandeered several of the gossip Facebook pages that were started about Andrea. And that's like the biggest boss move ever, that she went in and like infiltrated these crappy Facebook pages that were just talking horrible things about Andrea and about her family. And now she's running them. She also is working to help other local families look for their missing loved ones. So she's not just stopping at Andrea. She said, quote, "That's your goal, is just to turn it into something, make it mean something. Because Andrea, she means everything to me. She still does. And I feel almost like she can live on through me helping other people. I feel like this is what she would want me to do." And she is completely right. There are obviously several theories in this case. Again, because authorities aren't speaking much, I feel like all of them are kind of front and center for everyone to speculate on. First and foremost, the obvious one that police have stated to Mike, that they are focusing on Ethan. Now, I do want to say this was back in 2021 that they stated this. It's now 2024, so it's possible that that has completely changed at this point. Now, I will say, he was one of the last people to see her, which just in the grand scheme of things is like naturally the first place authorities will go to. He was the one who took Andrea to McDonald's and they were there for 30 minutes together. I feel like it's very possible that their conversation during that time had to do with the fight Andrea just had with his fiance, and maybe that caused some tension. Or it's also very possible that he was just a third party in the situation, trying to be nice, trying to push her in the right direction in a time of need. I mean, he got her food, he took her to the hospital, so to me, that's just as likely. What I will say, however, is that Mike has had nothing good to say about Ethan at all in the docuseries. According to Mike, Ethan has a temper, and he brought it up several times during the docuseries. He also said that he personally tried to get Sarah to stay away from him. However, that could also have absolutely no relevance to the situation. Either way, I am sure that the police know way more than we do, and they have this well under control. Another potential theory is trafficking, like her family has suggested. I don't know what evidence they really have to suggest this as a possibility other than that possible connection to a nefarious crowd, but I really hope that this isn't something she had to go through. Which brings us to maybe someone from her drug world came to get her in those early morning hours. It seems that all of her well-meaning friends didn't agree to pick her up, so maybe she called someone that she knew would likely be up and active at the time. And as we stated, if she had pissed someone off or owed someone money, this really would be a prime opportunity to confront her about it when she was vulnerable and had nowhere to escape. She could have easily been walking into a trap totally unaware, and since she was very emotional at the time and in a state of distress, it very easily could have clouded her judgment about who she should or shouldn't reach out to. But again, I keep going back to this idea of this potential supplier of hers going around Erin's house months later. I just feel like if you had already dealt with that problem, that you wouldn't continue hanging around. Maybe there was someone else she owed money to, maybe there was someone else she had pissed off. Again, we don't know. It also seems so strange to me that Andrea was making all these phone calls between 1:30 to around 2, just after 2, and then she went completely quiet. But we know that during that time that she was quiet, she was at her mom's house still. I mean, at least until 4 a.m. So did she go quiet because she had arranged for someone to come and get her at this point and all she had to do was wait? Or did something happen to her in that time frame at her mom's house? However, what I will say is authorities clearly have her phone records to know when and who she was reaching out to that night. So if someone was set up to pick her up, I feel like they would know about it, and and I feel the focus would be very, very different at this point. Or maybe she used something like Snapchat or WhatsApp or Signal to message someone in a way that would be a lot harder for them to track down. And there's always the possibility that this was a stranger abduction. Now, some people have questioned if maybe the Lyft driver just, had an interest in her after dropping her off at her mom's house and stuck around. And I have absolutely no clue if authorities ever questioned this person because they've not shared that information. To me, it just doesn't seem very likely, because that would also mean the driver would have been sitting and waiting for some hours to snatch her, because her phone was still at the house around 4 a.m. And at least 2 of those hours, she was presumably just hanging around outside of her mom's house. So I just don't feel like the Lyft driver makes any sense. And it's also one of the safest neighborhoods in the area. So I doubt a total stranger with bad intentions was kind of patrolling the area, hoping that some random person in this country club type of neighborhood was walking around in the early morning hours. And also, statistically, stranger abductions are just not at all the most likely out of all scenarios. Then there is the final possibility that maybe she just went off on her own. She had been going through it, and that night she may have felt like everyone she relied on had abandoned her. May have felt incredibly defeated and like her family was against her and they didn't want her around. She couldn't get into the house. She didn't have a key. No one let her in. The friends that she was calling wouldn't come and get her or hadn't reached back out to her. So maybe she sat there stuck in her thoughts and decided to eventually just walk away. I can completely see that as being a possibility. But even then, how likely is it that she did that without eventually getting some sort of help? She had to get money from somewhere. She had to have gotten a ride from somewhere. And why would she have turned her phone off and then just vanished? While I think it's possible, I don't think it's the most likely out of all these potential theories. There are still constant efforts to locate Andrea. Erin has Andrea's Angels, which is a group chat that you can join to know the current efforts, to receive updated flyers, ways that you can help. Mike is still to this day chasing down every single lead. They also have a GoFundMe set up that goes straight towards printing out and laminating more flyers. They also have it listed that it will go towards hiring any professionals to help in the search. It also will help to support her 2 sons that are desperately missing her. So if you are able, please donate whatever you can. Even if it's just $1, that could be the one flyer that changes it all. They're also apparently still actively getting sightings of Andrea, which I think is also playing into this potential of trafficking. Maybe she's popping up in all of these areas and then quickly being taken away again. I'm hoping that authorities are still working diligently and hopefully will start to share more with her family now that more time has passed. There are so many people claiming so many things in this case. There is so much speculation. I just want her family to have answers and to be able to bring Andrea home.
It stews and it sits, and you don't have to peel too many layers back, and it's there.
It's been more than 4 years since Andrea Knabel disappeared, and her father is opening up on her 42nd birthday. This is Wave News at 11. I'm Noelle Friel. Knabel disappeared in the early hours of August 13th, 2019 in Audubon Park. Since then, her family has been trying to uncover what happened to her, and they still haven't given up hope in finding her alive. Wave News reporter David Ochoa talked to her father about the search on her birthday.
Andrea Knabel shares her birthday with her sister Erin, and the Knabel family has used their birthday as sort of an unofficial end to the holiday season. But ever since Andrea's disappearance, the holidays have only gotten tougher for the family.
A Christmas tree sits in Mike Knabel's living room 2 weeks after Christmas. But there's a reason for that.
January 7th has always been a day the family marked. It's the day we cherish, obviously, for their birthday, but we also have it as the end of Christmas, but we keep all the decorations, especially the tree, up.
The birthday belongs to 2 of his daughters, Erin and Andrea Knabel, who were born on the same day 3 years apart. 2 daughters sharing the same birthday shortly after Christmas would normally just be a blessing. But for the Knabel family, it's also a tough reminder.
So about those 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks in there are really kind of sad, and you know that this was the 5th Christmas since anyone that we know of has seen her.
No one has seen Andrea Knabel since August 13th, 2019, after she went for a walk in Audubon Park. Well, no one credible Over the last 4.5 years, tips have come in from people claiming they saw Andrea, but none have been proven.
You get to a point where you see how even the law enforcement individuals out there that see things that are skeptical of everything they hear and see, and you get like that. But as a family member and when it's your loved one, you're going to check everything out, and we have to.
Knabel is ready to check out a new tip that came in just a couple of days ago. Someone called in saying a woman who answered to Andrea was picked up by an ambulance in Indianapolis.
We know exactly where this happened. We know that there was an ambulance run, the time of it. We know the hospital. We know a potential place where this individual was staying.
Knabel says they understand what the odds say about Andrea being alive, but they still have to try, even if she wants nothing to do with them.
It's really important to know that this is an adult. If we find her, she can tell us to get lost, and we don't want to see you. I don't want to come back to the family, and that would have to be honored. But we would do everything we could to convince her otherwise.
Knabel is going to make some calls on this most recent tip, and even go out there himself in the next day or two. But first, he's celebrating the birthday of his 2 daughters and the unofficial end of Christmas for the Knabel family.
It makes me happy to see those things, and it's comforting.
Andrea would do this for each and every single one of us if we had gone missing. We owe it to her to fight like she fought for everyone else. On that note, I'm going to go ahead and go, you guys. I have all of the information listed down below. If you have any idea where Andrea is or any of the events that occurred that night, there are ways to anonymously put these tips in. I do believe there's still a $10,000 reward. Don't quote me on that. I can't really find a lot of information on it. And also, as always, my sources are listed down below as well if you would like to do your own research. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to Andrea's story. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below to become a part of the Hallen fams, that we can hopefully bring them home together or bring them justice together. I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.